The first voice to answer our distress beam spoke a language our library had to dig 9 layers down to name. 51 minutes after I fired the beam at the Mercy lattice, the receiver lit, and what came out of it was not the lattice's tone stamp, not the Accord's confirmation pulse, not anything our protocols had a slot for. It was a voice. Calm, dry, slightly nasal, speaking words that meant nothing to me, on a band I had not transmitted on. I know I had not transmitted on it. I have checked the emitter logs more times than I will admit in any formal record. The beam went out on lattice band prime, aimed at the relay chain that runs from the tithe belt down to Vale Anchorage exactly as the manual requires. Whatever else happened in those 6 days, the aim was true. The aim was always true. That is the part I need whoever reads this to understand first. We did not call them. We never called them. I am Ven Tessel, 3rd Watch Signals Officer of the Orhauler 9th Furrow, registered out of Vale Anchorage, crew of 38. 37, by the time the voice arrived. Drive watch mate Alan Marsk had been on the outer catwalk when the spall storm came through, and the same gravel that opened our drive core took him with it. We had committed his rap to the dark 11 hours before the receiver lit. There was nothing ceremonial left in any of us by then. There was heat and arithmetic and a Q number. The strike itself had taken 19 seconds. We were 8 days out from the tithe belt on the long sunward ellipse, holds full of crushed ore for the refinery transfer, when the forward sensors caught a ring of debris that no chart admitted to. Old mining tailings. Probably scattered by somebody's sloppy blasting 2 generations back and left to orbit Gessa like a tripwire. Shipmaster Wren put us nose on and burned lateral, and it almost worked. Almost. A fan of gravel raked us from the drive section aft. It sheared both radiator wings off at the root, cracked the jump core's containment sleeve along 1/2 meter of weld, and punched 4 holes in the outer hull, one of them through the catwalk where Olin stood. So when I say we sent a distress call, understand what kind, not panic. The C3 do not do panic on the record. The Accord trains it out of you before they let you touch a transmitter. I composed the standard form. Vessel identity, registry, position, vector, casualty count, nature of damage, assistance required, 1 heavy tug, 1 medical visit, priority justification attached. I aimed it at the Mercy lattice and I sent it, and then I logged the send, because the log is what makes a thing real. The lattice answered in 4 hours. That part worked exactly as designed. The reply was clean, properly stamped, and it said, distress acknowledged, Q standing 114, nearest heavy tug patient hand completing prior obligation, estimated arrival 9 days. Submit collateral certification for salvage adjacent services within 1 day cycle to preserve standing. 9 days. Engineer Prime Vask had the other number by then, and she gave it to the shipmaster in front of all of us, because she said heat does not respect rank, and neither would she. With both radiator wings gone, the 9th Furrow could not shed what her own systems produced. The interior was climbing a little under 1 degree every hour, and the cracked core, even damp to its lowest idle, leaked more. The crew would begin failing on the 4th day. By the 6th, the ship would be a sealed oven with 37 dead inside it, drifting punctually toward a rescue scheduled for the 9th. That was the state of us when the receiver lit on a band I had not used, in a voice I had never heard, in a language the library finally surfaced from its 9th archival layer with a tag I had to read 3 times. Terran, origin, Sol. Status in the Accord registry, known, distant, unassessed, no treaty, no contact protocol. No entry in the recognition tables at all beyond a single line noting that they existed and that nobody had gotten around to them. Vask was in the signals bay within minutes because a new voice on the receiver travels through a dying ship faster than smoke. She stared at the waveform the way you stare at a wound you have not decided to feel yet. Where did it come in, she asked. Low band. Old spectrum. Nothing of ours lives down there. I pulled the emitter diagnostics up beside it because I had already half-guessed and wanted to be wrong. I was not wrong. The spall storm had cracked more than the core. Our main transmitter's focusing coil had a hairline fracture through its 3rd winding, and a cracked coil does not stop transmitting. It transmits badly. Alongside the clean beam I had aimed at the Mercy lattice, the coil had sprayed a harmonic side lobe, a smeared ghost of our distress call, down into a stretch of dead spectrum and out into the dark in most directions at once. So the call leaked, Vask said. The call leaked, and something down there was listening. The voice spoke for 40 seconds and stopped. 20 minutes later, it spoke again, the identical 40 seconds, and I understood it was repeating on a cycle, patient as a beacon. By then, I had the library running comparative analysis, and by the 3rd repetition, it had enough to produce a first-pass rendering. I have kept that rendering. It is in the log, and at the inquiry they played it aloud. And even the tribunal's recorder, a man with a face like a sealed hatch, sat still while it ran. This is what the first human transmission said. Unidentified vessel, this is Boundary Relay 9. We received your transmission on a protected emergency band. We believe we are not your addressee. We believe you are in distress. This band is monitored at all times. If you require assistance, respond on this frequency. If we do not understand your language, send anything, and we will work on it. We are listening. We believe we are not your addressee, they said it first. Before we had confirmed anything, before we had said one word back, they had looked at a smear of misrouted alien telemetry that landed on a band their own kind had presumably kept for their own emergencies, recognized it was never meant for them, and answered anyway. I want that sequence to be exact in the record, because at the inquiry, much was made of who initiated contact, and the answer is that nobody initiated it. A broken coil initiated it. Everything after was just two species deciding what to do about a wrong number. Shipmaster Wren came down to the signals bay himself, which he did perhaps twice a voyage. He was old in the way deep-haul masters get old, dried rather than softened, and he stood and listened to the rendering twice through without his face moving. Unregistered species, he said. You know the statute, Tessel. No exchange with an unregistered polity without accord sanction. Request the sanction. Round trip to Vale Anchorage Authority with their queue is 2 days minimum, I said. We will spend a quarter of what we have left waiting for permission to say hello. Then we wait silently and work the heat problem, Wren said. The lattice is coming. The lattice is coming on day 9, Vask said. The heat problem ends us on day 5-6 if we stop moving and lie on the deck plates. I can slow the curve. I cannot bend it under 9 days with what is on this ship. I have run it 4 ways. The margin is not thin, Shipmaster. There is no margin. Wren looked at the waveform a long time. I will say this for him, and I said it at the inquiry too. He never pretended the arithmetic was other than it was. He asked Vask if she was certain twice, and the second time he asked it with his palm laid flat on the console, pressing down, as if the certainty were a physical thing he could test the weight of. Then he straightened up and told me the words I logged at the 11th hour of the first day. Signals officer, answer the wrong number, on my authority. Logged that it was my order and mine alone. I logged it. Then I sat with my hands over the board and realized I had no idea what you say to a species your own civilization had filed under not yet. The manual has forms for every grade of distress, every class of vessel, every flavor of bureaucratic regret. It has nothing for this. In the end, I sent the simplest thing the manual did have. Our distress form, complete and unabridged, the same one I had aimed at the Mercy Lattice, followed by a mathematics primer the library kept for first survey work, primes in slow clean pulses, base counts, the hydrogen line as a unit of measure. Here is who we are, here is how we count, here is how badly we are hurt. Then we waited, and the waiting taught me the shape of the conversation we were going to have, because the reply came back in 51 minutes, almost to the second. Whoever they were, they sat roughly 25.5 light minutes from us. Every question would take most of an hour to come home. There would be no banter across that gap, no hand-holding. There would be statements launched into the dark, and answers arriving from a past that had already moved on. The entire rescue, if you could call it that, would be conducted by correspondence. The 51-minute reply was not a greeting. I have thought about that since. A greeting would have cost them nothing, and most species in my experience would have spent an hour on ceremony. The humans spent it on triage. Their transmission opened with our own primes played back, confirmation of handshake, and then a request, rendered by the library with what I later learned was almost no softening at all. Send everything. Hull schematic, power schematic, atmosphere composition, crew biology tolerances, thermal readings at every sensor you have, time-stamped. Do not summarize. Do not select what you think matters. We do not know yet what matters. Send all of it. Vask read that over my shoulder and made a sound I had never heard from her, a short exhale that was not quite a laugh. That, she said, is the first sensible sentence anyone has transmitted to this ship since the storm. We sent all of it. It took 3 hours to package and most of our transmit budget for the watch, and Wren authorized it without being asked twice. 37 of us, cooking by degrees inside a sealed hull, beaming the complete anatomy of our ship at a species whose name we had learned that morning on a frequency we had never meant to touch, and 25.5 light minutes away, on a station we had never heard of, belonging to a people we had never spoken to, somebody was already reading it. Somebody had already cleared their board, already called in others. We know now there were 4 humans on Boundary Relay 9 at the first hour and over 200 on the circuit by the 3rd day. We knew none of that then. We knew only that the receiver lit again 51 minutes after our send. With a short transmission, the library rendered in 9 words. Received. Working. Boundary 9 does not close this channel. The interior temperature passed the first caution line that night. I sat my watch with the receiver open and the dead spectrum hissing, and I remember thinking, with the particular clarity that comes when the body has begun to be afraid and the mind has not yet agreed to join it, that we had aimed our call at our own salvation and been answered by strangers, and that I could not decide which of those two facts was going to matter more. By morning, I had my first evidence. The Mercy Lattice sent its second transmission of the emergency, a reminder that our collateral certification was now overdue and that Q standing could not be preserved indefinitely. 51 minutes behind it, as if the universe wished the comparison entered cleanly into the record, Boundary 9 sent its second, a thermal analysis of our hull, sensor by sensor with the failed radiator route circled, and one line beneath that I read aloud to the watch before I could stop myself. Your radiators are gone, but your ore is not. Stand by. We think your cargo can save your lives. The full packet behind that line took another hour to arrive, and Vask spread it across the engineering board like a surgeon laying out instruments. What the humans had seen in our telemetry was this. Our holds carried 11,000 tons of crushed ore, cold-soaked from 8 days of transit shadow, sitting inert in the one part of the ship that did not care about temperature. Rock is patient. Rock will drink heat for hours before it complains. And the ninth furrow, being a hauler, had high-volume wash lines running through every hold, built to slurry the ore for transfer pumping at the refinery end. Their proposal, stripped of the careful redundancy they wrapped around every instruction, flood the wash lines with coolant drawn from the dead radiator loops. Run the slurry circuit so the coolant passed through the cold ore mass and let 11,000 tons of rock become the radiator we no longer had. When a hold's ore warmed through, vent that hold's load overboard through the tailing chute and move to the next. We would be spending our cargo to buy hours, burning the voyage's profit to stay alive inside it. It will work, Vask said. And then, because she was Vask, partially, the numbers are honest. They have even derated the pump efficiency for our power state. See here, they assumed worse than I would have assumed. Whoever wrote this expected to be doubted and wrote it for the doubter. This buys us into the 5th day. Perhaps 40 hours past the old line. 40 hours is not 9 days, Ren said. No, but 40 hours is 40 hours. And yesterday I could not buy us one. She was already keying crew assignments. And shipmaster, note the structure of it. This is not a rescue plan. They know they cannot reach us. Nothing they fly can be here inside 20 days. And they have not pretended otherwise, not once. Look, they say it in the header. She tapped the line, and the library's rendering sat there in its flat translated type, and I have carried those 2 sentences with me into every year since. We cannot reach you. We can reach your problem. The work of the 2nd day was brutal in the way that saves lives, which is to say it was boring and it was endless and it was done half-naked in, climbing heat by a crew that had stopped sweating efficiently somewhere around the 30th hour. We cut the radiator loops free of their sheared roots and replumbed them into the wash mains with jumper hose meant for slurry transfer. Loaderhand Brelon, who was the oldest soul aboard and had prayed to the Accord's road saints at shift start every day of the voyage, worked the hold valves for 11 hours straight and prayed at none of them. When I asked him about it afterward, he said the saints supervised travel, and nothing about that day had been travel. I spent the day where I spent every day after, at the signals board, because the humans had begun transmitting on a schedule and the schedule did not care that I was tired. Here is the thing I had not understood about a 51-minute round trip, the thing that taught me more about that species than any line of their language. They stopped waiting for our answers. A correspondence rescue run question by question would have burned days in transit lag, and they had clearly sat down, done that arithmetic in their first hour, and restructured everything around it. Boundary 9's transmissions became a continuous stream. They answered questions we had not asked yet. They sent branching instructions. If the pump cavitates, here is the sequence. If it does not, discard and proceed. They anticipated our failures in advance and packed the failure handling alongside the procedure so that when Hold 2's transfer pump did cavitate, at the worst hour of the night watch, the cure was already aboard, already translated, sitting in the queue like a tool laid out before the wound. They are conversing with a version that does not exist yet, I told Ren at the watch turn. They model where we will be in 1 hour, and they talk to that. I have never seen Signals doctrine like it. It is not Signals doctrine, Ren said. He had taken to standing in the bay during his rounds, listening to the stream come in. It is what you do when the storm is between you and your own, and the only thing that travels faster than the storm is your voice. That is not a doctrine a species writes down because it is clever, Tessel. That is a doctrine a species writes down because it has buried people for the lack of it. I logged the remark because I log everything, and I thought of it again 4 days later when I learned how right he was. The slurry circuit went live at the 41st hour. Vask stood in engineering with her hand on the main wash valve and her eyes on the thermal. Curve and the whole crew, those not holding a station, found reasons to be in earshot. The pumps took load, the coolant moved, and the curve, which had climbed with the smooth indifference of arithmetic for 2 days, shallowed, wavered, and lay down almost flat, not down. Flat is not the same as down, and Vask said so loudly before anyone could celebrate, because she rationed hope the way she rationed power. But the ship went quiet in a new way that hour. The heat was still in the air, still in the deck plates, still wrapped around every breath, yet it had stopped being a verdict and become a clock again, and a clock you can fight. We jettisoned Hold One's load on the third morning, 800 tons of ore that had spent 30 hours drinking the heat that would have killed us, fired out the tailing chute glowing faintly at the core of the mast like a coal. I watched it go from the dorsal port, half the voyage's pay, tumbling off into Guess's long light, and behind me Brelon watched it too and said, with profound satisfaction, cheapest rock anyone ever sold. It was the third day when the channel changed character, and I marked the moment in the log because a signals officer notices texture the way an engineer notices vibration. The early transmissions had been one voice, the dry baritone the library tagged as Speaker 1 and whom we came to know as Okafor, duty operator of Boundary Relay 9, the human who had been on watch when our ghost-smeared distress call crawled out of her dead spectrum. From the third day, the stream carried other voices. A measured one that handled everything thermal, tagged Pharaoh. A rapid one for power systems, Tran. One older than the rest, slow, almost amused, that spoke only about trajectories, and signed itself Whitlock. The library built voice files the way it built vocabulary, and the crew, against every regulation concerning anthropomorphic attachment to an unassessed species, began to know them. It was Tran's voice that delivered the third day's blow, although the humans, with the tact I later understood was deliberate, framed it as a question. Their stream asked for an hour-by-hour log of our core containment readings. Vask sent it. 51 minutes later, the stream set aside its cue, which it had never done, and Tran's transmission opened with a sentence the library rendered flat as deck plate. Your cracked core is the second radiator failure. It must be shut down completely, and we believe you already know this. We already knew this. Vask had known it since the storm and had been spending the knowledge a coin at a time. The core, even idling, leaked heat. The slurry circuit was now spending precious ore to absorb. Fully shut down, it would buy back hours of cargo. But a full shutdown on a fractured containment sleeve is not a thing you reverse with a switch. Restart stresses the sleeve tenfold. Shut it down, and the ninth furrow would never move under her own drive again. We would finish this voyage as a sealed can of cooling meat, wholly dependent on the tug that was. The Mercy Lattice reminded us that same evening in its third transmission, still 6 days out, and still awaiting our collateral certification, the absence of which had now triggered an administrative review of our queue standing. I am a signals officer, tone is my trade, and I will testify with my hand on any registry you like that there was more care for our lives in the human transmission telling us to kill our own drive than in every stamped syllable our own rescue grid sent across those 9 days. Wren took the decision to the full crew, which the manual does not require and old deep haul masters do anyway. He laid out both arithmetics, the ore hours against the dead drive, and he asked for objections, and there were none. Then he turned to me, and the heat had carved him down so the bones of his face stood out like frame members, and he said, "Tell Boundary 9 we concur, and Tessel, ask them the question." He did not have to say which one. Every soul on the ship had been not asking it for 3 days. I composed it carefully because I did not want the library's rendering to blunt it. Boundary 9, this is ninth furrow. We concur on core shutdown and will execute on your sequence. Question follows. Our transmission to you was a malfunction, a cracked coil. You knew from the first hour we did not aim our distress at your people, and you have spent 3 days of labor on us regardless. Our registry holds no treaty with you. We can offer no payment that would survive our own tribunals. Why are you doing this? The reply took the usual 51 minutes, and then it took longer, and I sat watching the dead spectrum hiss. And for the first time since the storm I felt the lag as cruelty rather than physics. When the stream resumed, it was Okafor, alone, off schedule, and the library rendered her answer in sentences so short I could hear the original cadence through the translation. Ninth furrow, Boundary 9. Your question is noted and considered fair. Answer follows. The band your signal reached is old. We keep it from our first years off our own world, when we lost crews because no one was listening on the hour they called. The band is kept open for anyone with nothing else. There is no nationality requirement written on it. We checked. A pause sat in the transmission there, a deliberate second of carrier hiss, and then the last of it came through. You reached the desk where we keep our dead, ninth furrow. Nobody at this desk is going to ask a drowning man for his addressee field. Execute the shutdown sequence when ready. We are not going anywhere. I read it aloud to the watch because that was my duty, and I will not record in any log what the watch did, because some things belong to a crew and not to a tribunal. But I will record this. Brel An, who had stopped praying at the hold valves, asked me that night for the proper pronunciation of Boundary Relay 9 and added it, between the road saints and the keepers of arrivals, to his litany. We shut the core down on the fourth morning. Vask walked the sequence the humans had built, cross-checked against her own, found them agreeing in every line and said so on the open channel in a voice that gave away nothing, which from Vask was a citation for valor. The drive of the ninth furrow went cold for the first time in 11 years, and the thermal curve bent downward, truly downward, for the first time since the storm. For about 6 hours we believed the worst was arithmetic we had already done. Then Whitlock's voice arrived in the evening stream, slow and very careful, and asked us to verify our position to a precision nobody needs for a thermal problem, and I felt the floor of the emergency drop out from under us into something deeper. Because heat had never been the only clock. We had simply not been able to see the other one. Whitlock had. 25.5 light minutes away, an old human had been quietly rebuilding our trajectory from first principles for 2 days, and what he had found at the bottom of his mathematics, he was now obliged to tell us. Whitlock's full packet arrived an hour past midnight, shipwrecking on the fourth night, and Vask and I took it to Wren's cabin together because neither of us wanted to carry it alone. The mathematics ran 12 pages with every step shown, the way all their work came, built to be checked rather than believed. The conclusion ran 4 lines. When the Spall storm killed our drive, it had killed it mid-burn, 11 seconds into a 40-second deceleration leg that the flight plan used to trim our sunward ellipse. Without those missing 29 seconds, our orbit's low point dipped deeper toward Gessa than any hauler is rated to fly. Not into the star, nothing so clean. Into the flare corridor, the band of near space where Gessa's outbursts ran, and Gessa was an active flare star with a documented temper, and our hull, stripped of radiators, holed in 4 places, would cross the corridors hard on the 6th day and remain inside it for 19 hours. The Mercy Lattice tug arrived on the 9th. The humans did not editorialize about that. They simply printed both numbers in the same table, 6th day, 9th day, and let the table speak. A flare is weather, Wren said at last. It may not come. It may not, Vask agreed. Whitlock's packet gives Gessa's eruption frequency from their own survey archive. They have watched this star for 60 years. We have mined past it and never once looked up. In any 19-hour window, the chance of a major event is 1 in 4. Shipmaster, I have shipped with worse odds. I have never shipped with worse odds inside a hull that cannot take 1 degree more. And their remedy? Vask laid the second half of the packet on his desk, and this was the half she had read 4 times on the walk, the half that had made her stop in the corridor and stand entirely still for the length of 10 breaths. The humans proposed to restart our dead core, the core they themselves had ordered killed, for a single burn of 11 seconds, at the precise hour of the 5th day when our position made 11 seconds sufficient. 11 seconds at minimum thrust would lift the ellipse's low point clear of the corridor. After it, the core would die its final death, and nothing would ever start it again, and nothing would need to. The sleeve is fractured, I said. Restart stress is 10-fold idle. Vask, you told them that yourself. They printed it back to us in their own shutdown brief. They did, Vask said. Page 8. Read page 8, Tessel. Page 8 was the clamp. The humans had spent their 2 days of thermal arithmetic also reading, apparently, every line of the cargo manifest and equipment registry we had transmitted on the first night, the inventory they had told us not to summarize, and somewhere on their station or on whatever world stood behind it, somebody had assembled in their mind the contents of an alien ore hauler and asked what a mining ship carries that a shipyard would envy. The answer was on page 8. Structural binding resin, 40 drums, the kind used to stabilize fractured rock faces before cutting. Cold weld plate stock for hold patching, and the cargo gantry's hydraulic rams, each rated for loads that made the core sleeves needs look polite. Their procedure pulled the rams from the gantry, cut plate to template, set the plates over the fractured weld line bedded in rock resin, and preloaded the whole assembly with hydraulic pressure, a corset of mining equipment cinched around a dying drive. Holding the crack closed by brute force for 11 seconds, the templates were drawn to our own measurement system. They had learned our units from a mathematics primer 4 days old and were now returning them to us as engineering drawings. Wren read it twice. Then he asked the question he was required by every instinct of a registry shipmaster to ask. And the lattice's view? We had sent the trajectory data to the Mercy Lattice at the same hour we acknowledged it ourselves. Whatever else we were a cord, and the manual is the manual. Their reply came the next morning. stamped and formatted and queued behind a renewed notice regarding collateral certification. The Lattice's Flight Safety Directorate had reviewed the third-party trajectory analysis. The Directorate did not dispute the mathematics. The Directorate noted, however, that an unsanctioned core restart and compromised containment conducted on the advice of an unregistered polity would void the vessel certification, expose the operating company to liability review, and contravene Standing Instruction 11 regarding acceptance of technical direction from non-accord sources. The instruction of record was therefore, maintain safe configuration, await the patient hand, and direct all further communication with the unregistered party to cease. I read it to the watch because that also was my duty. The silence afterward had a quality I have met nowhere else. The silence of 37 people performing the same subtraction at the same time. Awaiting the patient hand meant lying in a cooling can while one chance in four of a stellar temper crossed our path with our names on it because the alternative had not been stamped by the correct desk. Wren stood in that silence for a long moment. Then he did the thing for which, more than for any order of the 6 days, I believe his name belongs in whatever the Sethri keep instead of sagas. He walked to my board, took the transmit key himself, an instrument he had not personally operated in 20 years, and dictated slowly for the library to render and send the following. Boundary Relay 9, this is Shipmaster called Wren of the 9th Furrow. My registry instructs me to cease this communication. My registry is 6 light hours away and has never seen this ship. You have never seen this ship either, but you have read her honestly, which at present is more than I can say for my own grid. I have 37 lives, a fractured core, and your page 8. My engineer prime tells me your mathematics holds. My signals officer tells me your word has held for 4 days. That is the entire collateral this vessel has left to certify. We will fly your burn, send the final sequence. And if your people keep records of such things, record that we asked you to. 51 minutes. Then the stream which had paused resumed, and it was all of them at once, Okafor and Pharaoh and Tran and the slow old voice of Whitlock, and the transmission was the final burn sequence, complete, simulation checked, with our names written into the step assignments. They had not waited for our decision to begin the work. They had begun it days before on the modest, unsentimental assumption that we would choose to live. At the bottom of the sequence, beneath the last checksum, Okafor had appended one line outside the technical frame entirely. The library rendered it without comment. Noted for the record at this desk, the 9th Furrow asked. Boundary 9 answered. Wrong number, right ship. Proceed. The 5th day was the clamp, and the clamp was the hardest physical labor I have witnessed, human or Sethri. Propose. The drive section had been sealed since the storm, hold to vacuum aft of frame 90, which the humans, reading our atmosphere budget like a ledger, had pronounced an advantage. Suited work in vacuum sheds no heat into the hull. Vask led 4 of us in. I was the 5th because the procedure required a signals officer at the local panel, and I record without shame that my suit gauge showed my heart running like a transfer pump the entire first hour. We pulled the gantry rams in 2 shifts. We cut plate to the human templates, and the templates were correct. Everyone to the width of a scribe line. We bedded the plates in rock resin along the fractured weld, and the resin, formulated for stone, gripped the alloy sleeve the way the human materials note, signed Saarinen, a new voice, calm as still water, had predicted it would, with one warning about cure time and vacuum cold that proved accurate to within minutes. Then we set the rams and began to preload, and at 60% preload the second oldest ram seized, its seals perished from 11 years of gantry duty, and the procedure's failure branch, already aboard, already translated, directed us to the replacement we would never have considered. The launch ram from the Orschute's ejection cradle, same bore, same era, but barely used. Brelon and Vask swapped the units in 3 hours of work the humans had estimated at 3.5, and when Vask confirmed full preload on the open channel I heard, behind Okafor's acknowledgement, before the transmission cut, a sound from the human station that needed no library entry. Many voices at once, brief and loud. Cheering is evidently a constant of the universe. Vask came out of the drive section with her hands burned through both glove liners, palm and fingers, from resin catalysis heat she had decided not to mention until the work was finished, because, she said, the procedure had no failure branch for stopping. The medic wrapped them in the cool room where we had moved the worst off of the crew, and she sat among them with her bandaged hands in her lap, looking at the thermal curve on the wall repeater, and said to no one in particular that she had been schooled her whole life to believe competence was a Sethri virtue, and that she found it now to be merely a virtue, distributed wherever the universe pleased, and that she intended to be less proud and more careful about that from this day on. The burn window opened at the 6th hour of the 5th day, and it was here, in the final rehearsal, that the humans solved the problem I had believed all along would be the one to kill us, the problem of the lag. An 11-second burn must begin inside a 4-second tolerance. No exchange across 51 minutes can hold a hand through that. I had assumed we would simply fly it alone on our own clock and our own nerve. Whitlock's last packet before the window disabused me. They had computed the ignition second in our reckoning, and theirs, cross-checked against the pulsar timing standard their first packet had taught us to read, and they would transmit a countdown timed to arrive at our receiver in synchrony with the true second, a voice launched 25.5 minutes into the past, aimed at a future it would never see, arriving exactly when it was needed. The packet ended with the only sentence of the 6 days I ever heard the library hesitate over, offering 2 renderings as if unwilling to choose. The first rendering, "The count you will hear was begun before you were ready. We trusted you would be ready." The second, "We started counting before you could hear us. We knew you would catch up." I logged both. I have never deleted either. We took stations for the burn at the 5th hour, a full hour early, because Wren said a crew that has nothing to do but wait should at least wait, strapped down. Vass stood the drive panel with her bandaged hands, having refused relief in terms that ended the discussion before it began. Brel-On held the hold pressure board because 11 seconds of thrust would slosh 11,000 tons of slurry wet ore, and the baffles were his to mind. I held signals with the receiver gain set high and the dead spectrum hissing in my ear like surf on a shore I had never seen. The ship was the quietest she had been since the storm. The core sat at restart ready, the corset of rams and resin-bedded plates cinched around her fractured sleeve at full preload, and every gauge on Vask's panel sat exactly where page 11 of the human sequence said it should sit. We had rehearsed the abort branches until the crew could walk them asleep, and some of us by then very nearly were. 4 days of climbing heat had pressed us all thin. The medic had certified every station holder fit with a thermometer in one hand and a flexible definition of fit in the other. At 11 minutes before the window, the receiver lit. I had known it would. Whitlock's packet had given the arrival time of the count to the second, and still, when the carrier rose out of that dead band, strong and clean and exactly on its mark, my breath caught as if something had laid a hand on the back of my neck. The voice was Okafor's. They had chosen her for it, I learned much later, by a vote aboard their station that was apparently not close. The transmission had left Boundary Relay 9:25.5 minutes earlier, launched by people who could not know our final status, could not hear our acknowledgments, could not call an abort. A voice from the recent past, speaking with perfect confidence into a future it had to take on faith. "Ninthfurrow, Boundary 9, this is your count. We are with you. Everything we can check from here, we have checked twice. The rest belongs to your hands, and your hands have been good enough all week." 11 minutes to ignition on my mark. 11 minutes, the same span as the burn's 11 seconds. And I do not believe for a moment that the symmetry was an accident. They were a species of small deliberate gestures buried in procedure. We had 5 days of evidence by then. She read the count plainly, without drama, marking each minute, then each 30 seconds, then each 10. Between marks, she did not fill the air with chatter, but twice in the long gaps, she said short things that were not procedure. At 4 minutes, "Your engineer's clamp is the best improvised pressure work anyone at this desk has seen, and this desk has seen some at 90 seconds. After the burn, you will want to sleep. Don't. Send us your numbers first. We will be sitting right here not breathing." At 10 seconds, she stopped talking entirely except for the numbers. I will tell what the inquiry asked me to tell, in the order they asked it. At her 0, Vask's hand was already on the initiator, our own clock agreeing with the voice from the past to within a second, and she fired the core of the 9th furrow for the last time in the ship's life. Ignition came on hard. The deck shoved us. Somewhere aft, through the frames, I heard the sleeve take the load, a deep sound, a tone almost, like the ship clearing her throat around the wound, and Vask's eyes never left the containment trace, and the trace climbed, and bent, and held. It held inside the human projection's center band, not at its edge, dead in its center, for every one of the 11 seconds, while the clamp they had drawn from our cargo manifest and we had built with our hands gripped the fracture closed against pressures the sleeve had. No honest right to survive. 11 seconds. Cut off. The thrust died clean on the mark, and the core, as the sequence had promised, went down its final shutdown ramp and grew cold and would never be warm again and did not need to be. Brel-On called the hold stable. Vass called containment intact, residual stress within bounds, and then put her ruined hands flat on the panel and lowered her head, just for a moment, in the manner of a woman at a graveside, because she was an engineer prime and her drive was dead, and it had died saving every life it had ever carried. I transmitted the numbers, every trace, every margin, the whole 11 seconds in full instrumentation, and appended on Wren's order one sentence outside the technical frame, as they had once appended one to us. Burn complete on your count. The ship held. Your clamp held 37 souls, report so. Then, for 51 minutes, the longest of the 6 days, and I include the storm itself, we drifted and sweated and did not sleep until the receiver lit and Whitlock's slow old voice came through, and you could hear the room behind him, crowded and badly pretending to be calm. Ninth furrow, boundary 9. We have your telemetry. Stand by. A pause, carrier open, and beneath it, that surf sound of a distant room. Trajectory solution confirmed. Your low point now clears the flare corridor by 11,000 kilometers. You are out of the weather with margin. Repeat, you are clear. He let the room behind him be heard for 2 full seconds before the transmission cut. I have the recording. The library has never been asked to translate it, because there is nothing in it that is words. Wren unstrapped, stood, and addressed the crew over the ship's circuit for 11 words exactly, which I logged with the timestamp, because by then I understood I was keeping the record of something that would be read by people not yet assigned to read it. All hands, the sky is no longer falling, only the heat. Rest. But the heat, of course, was the bill for the burn, and the bill came due immediately. 11 seconds of core operation had dumped into the hull, in one swallow, more waste heat than 2 full days of idle leakage, exactly as the human budget had warned it would, printed in red figures on page 14 with the annotation that this cost was unavoidable and had been weighed. The thermal curve, which had lain down so obediently after shutdown, stood back up that evening and began to climb again. And vast recount of the ore reserve put the matter plainly. We had spent holds 1, 2, and 3. We had holds 4 and 5. The slurry circuit would exhaust the last cold rock aboard sometime late on the 8th day, and the patient hand arrived on the 9th, and between those two numbers lay a gap of roughly 14 hours, during which the 9th furrow would have nothing left to fight with but the slow, thermal mass of her own bones. We sent that arithmetic to Boundary 9 the way we now sent everything, raw and unsummarized. Their reply did not pretend the gap away. It restructured it. Pharaoh's voice, with new appendices, power down schedules deeper than we had believed survivable, sectional ceiling plans that gave up 2/3 of the habitable hull to buy coolness in the rest, crew rotation tables through the cool room with our own medics' biology notes folded in and improved upon. They had taken our 14-hour gap and shaved it, measure by measure, to something their tables called survivable for a healthy adult Sethri, with a margin they did not dress up, narrow. At the bottom of the packet, Okafor, outside the frame, one line. We have been arguing about your gap for 6 hours, and we will keep arguing until it is gone. Sleep in shifts. That is not advice. It is part of the cooling plan. Boundary 9. I wanted understood what was happening on the other end of that channel by the 6th day, because we ourselves did not fully understand it until the courier came, months later, with the records. Boundary Relay 9 was a listening station with a duty crew of 4. The voices we knew, Okafor, Pharaoh, Tran, Sarin, and Whitlock, were the front of a thing that had grown behind them all week, relayed back along their own networks to their home system, where it had been taken up, we learned, by several hundred volunteers, retired drive engineers, mining equipment manufacturers pulled out of bed to answer questions about resin, cure rates, and vacuum, a university's stellar weather section that put a rotating watch on Gessa, our star, which their species had no stake in whatsoever, and kept that watch running around their clock for the whole of the emergency. None of them was paid. None of them would ever meet us. Most of them, the records show, joined after their networks carried the first translated line of our distress form, the line that said casualty count 1, and the human appetite for a stranger's trouble did the rest. The Mercy Lattice, that same 6th day, sent us a form acknowledging receipt of our burn telemetry. The form noted that the maneuver had been conducted contrary to instruction, that the matter was referred to the registry tribunal, and that the patient hand remained on schedule. At the bottom, stamped the standard closing of every Lattice transmission, words I had read my whole career without hearing them. The Lattice holds all who fall. I read them that day, in that heat, with Okafor's sleep shift order open on the adjacent screen, and I had to leave the bay and stand in the corridor for a time. Vask found me there. She did not ask. She had her bandages, I had my logs, and the whole crew by then was carrying some version of the same splinter. The unbearable, unspeakable comparison between the grid we had aimed at and the strangers we had hit. Say it once, Vask said, and then file it where it belongs. They are 9 days away because the Q is the Q, I said. And the wrong number rebuilt our ship from a manifest in a language they learned on the 2nd day, and has not closed the channel in 6. Filed, she said. Now come and help me seal the aft sections. The monster's cooling plan has us giving up the engine spaces by nightfall, and I want to say goodbye to my drive. She said monsters with a particular weight. It had become aboard by the 6th day a title. Somewhere in the early transmissions, a crewman frightened of the old stories had called the unknown listeners that word within range of a live pickup, and the humans, when the library's growing fluency eventually rendered the exchange for them, had not taken offense. Okafor's reply, when it came, had entered the ship's permanent vocabulary that same hour. Plenty of people call us worse, and some of them are right. Monsters or not, drink the electrolyte schedule. You are 2 liters behind. So we sealed the aft 2/3 of our ship on the monster's advice, and slept in shifts on the monster's rotation, and went into the 7th day, the day Gessa, with 1 chance in 4 and a galaxy's worth of indifference to mathematics, decided to flare after all. The flare warning arrived before the flare did, which is a sentence I can write, only because the humans had put a watch on our star. It came in the 3rd hour of the 7th day, flagged at a priority their stream had never used, and it was not a voice but a siren-coded data burst, machine to machine, their stellar weather section to our navigation library. Followed 40 seconds later by Okafor speaking faster than I had ever heard her. Ninth furrow, boundary 9, flare alert. Gessa has begun a major eruptive event, confirmed optical and radio. Our watch called it 11 minutes ago. You are clear of the corridor. Repeat. You are clear. The ejection cone does not intersect your track. You will still catch the radio storm and the particle fringe. Expect communications blackout on this band within roughly 2 hours. Duration unknown, possibly a full day. Packet of instructions follows for the fringe passage. Do not be afraid when this channel goes quiet. We do not stop transmitting because you cannot hear us. Acknowledge, I acknowledged. Then I sat very still for a moment because 2 facts had arrived in the same transmission and they had not finished landing. The first fact, the 1 chance in 4 had come up. Gessa had flared. Inside the very window Whitlock's mathematics had drawn around our old trajectory. If the storm had not killed our drive mid-burn, if the coil had not cracked, if the wrong number had not been dialed and answered, the 9th furrow would at that hour have been 40 hours from crossing the heart of the corridor that was now filling with stellar fire. But we would never have known to fear it. We would have drifted into it, cooked half to death and uncomprehending. And the patient hand, arriving punctually on the 9th day, would have found a hull full of what flares leave, the second fact. We were about to lose the voices. The instruction packet was thorough, as always. Radiation postures for the crew, sheltered zones mapped onto our own deck plans, twin sensor heads to power down before the particle fringe arrived, and in what order, a folded set of contingencies for every system the storm might touch. And at the end, a line that told me they had thought about the silence itself, had recognized that for a crew 6 days dependent on a heartbeat from the dark, the silence might be its own kind of damage. While the band is down, we will transmit continuously on schedule regardless. When the noise clears, everything we said will be waiting for you in the backlog. You will not have been alone at any point. You will simply find out later. Gessa's storm reached us in the 5th hour. We watched it come on the 1 navigation head the humans had told us to leave up, watched our star, that dull furnace we had mined past for 3 generations without curiosity, throw off a filament of itself with a violence that made the bridge go silent. The corridor we had been lifted out of lit from within, a river of charged fire 11,000 kilometers below our keel, and Brelon stood at the port with his lips moving through his litany, and I watched him reach the new entry, the one he had asked me to pronounce, and saw him linger on it. Ren stood beside me at the navigation repeater for a long while, watching the corridor burn. He had grown gaunt and slow in the heat, all of us had, but his voice when he finally spoke was the voice of a man setting a thing down permanently into the record of himself. 11 seconds, he said. The whole of the difference is 11 seconds. Then he turned and went back to his rounds, and from that day until his retirement, I am told, he never once filed a flight plan past Gessa without appending the human weather feed, which the Accord by then had learned to receive. The band died at the 6th hour, as predicted. The hiss of the dead spectrum rose to a roar of stellar static and swallowed every voice in it. I sat at my board through the watch and listened to the noise of a star shouting down the only channel we had, and I will confess into this record what I confessed at the inquiry when they asked, with genuine curiosity, what the silence had been like. I said it was like a hand had been holding mine for 6 days, and the hand was gone, and an officer of the Accord with a registry seal on my certification, had to remind myself for several consecutive hours that the absence of a sound is not the absence of the thing that makes it. The blackout lasted 19 hours, and they were the hardest of the 9 days, harder than the burn, because nothing in them needed courage, only endurance. And endurance was the one stores item we had not been able to stockpile. The heat climbed through the sealed ship. Hold 4 exhausted its cold rock in the 14th hour of the storm, and we vented it, 800 glowing tons, into the flare-lit dark, and brought the last hold online, and Vask stood looking at the figure for remaining cooling capacity and said nothing at all. which from Vask was a complete report. 2 crew of the original 37 went down in the blackout hours, the old purser first and then a young old hand, not dead but heat-felled, past working, carried to the cool room, where the medic now ran the human rotation tables like liturgy. The rest of us moved through the surviving third of the ship slowly, deliberately on the monster's schedule, drinking on their clock, sleeping in their shifts, and around us the hull ticked and breathed with thermal stress. And below us the corridor burned, and through it all the receiver roared its blank stellar roar, and we endured because there was nothing else of any use to do. In the 16th hour of the blackout, alone at my board, I did something I had no order for. I keyed the transmitter, aimed it down the dead band into the heart of the noise where nothing could possibly be heard, and sent, in their language, assembled from the library's growing store of it, 3 sentences. Boundary 9, 9th furrow. We know you cannot hear this either. We are still here, and we are transmitting anyway, because you taught us that this is what the band is for. The noise began to thin in the storm's 23rd hour. It did not lift like a curtain. It decayed, ragged, in patches, and through the first clear patch, faint and grit-scared and stretched by the dying interference, came a human voice reading. Of all the things in their language it might have been reading, a list. I gained the rhythm of it before I gained the words. It was Okafor, and she was reading slowly with comments, the complete equipment inventory of Boundary Relay 9, item by item, including an account of which chairs were broken and a long-standing dispute over the station's one hot drink machine. When the band finally firmed, the backlog cascaded in, 19 hours of transmission sent into a roar by people who knew with certainty they could not be heard. I have read all of it. The Accordsonology section has read all of it. It is, I am told, the single most studied continuous document of human behavior in the registry. It contains scheduled instruction repeats, every one on its mark. Updated weather from their guess-a-watch every hour, regardless. Revisions to the endgame cooling plan as their volunteers refined it, each revision noted as superseding the last, so that whenever we came back, we would come back current, and in the gaps between procedure voices. Not always Okafor's. They had taken turns. Tran read something that the library eventually identified as poetry and annotated, with its machine politeness, as untranslatable in 3 places. Saarinen explained at length the rules of a game played with cards. Whitlock told the story, slow and dry, of a crude mission of their own early spaceflight centuries past, a vessel of theirs crippled far from home by a failure nobody had imagined, and of the men who had come back alive from it anyway, alive because, he said, a roomful of people on the ground had refused to stop solving the problem in front of them, and refused in such a way that refusing became, ever afterward, the way his people understood the word rescue. He did not draw the comparison to us. He told it and let it sit, and signed off with the weather. And once, in the deepest hour of the storm, a transmission that was simply Okafor, evidently long past the end of her duty shift, saying, "Status, nothing new. You are not hearing this, which is fine. The desk is staffed. The desk stays staffed. That is all the content of this transmission. Boundary 9. The library's running fluency analysis flags that transmission as content-free. I have ordered the flag preserved because the flag is the most honest possible measure of the distance between what a thing says and what a thing is. We answered the moment the band could carry us, and I sent the 3 sentences I had launched into the noise a second time so they would have them on the record, and 51 minutes later the stream came back with first a complete retransmission of anything corrupted, demanded by checksum without sentiment, and then Okafor, and you could hear 19 hours of a held breath going out of her, saying, "Ninth furrow, Boundary 9. Backlog confirms what we believed. You held the line. 2 heat casualties in the cool room is 2 fewer than our worst projection and 2 more than we will accept going forward. Revised rotation follows. Weather, your star has finished its tantrum. Time to tug arrival. 31 hours, or remaining 1 hold. The arithmetic is going to be close, and we have been arguing about it for 19 hours, and we are going to win. Stand by for the endgame plan. And 9th furrow, regarding your blackout transmission, the one you sent into the noise. A pause 1 second, deliberate as a hand placed on a shoulder. Received, logged. You are learning the trade. Boundary 9. The endgame plan was delayed 3 hours, because the 9th furrow very nearly died of a bearing first. It was the humans who heard it coming. I want that in the record with everything else, because it is, in its small way, the most uncanny single event of the 9 days. The main slurry pump had run continuously since the 41st hour, 7 days without rest, pushing coolant through 11,000 tons of rock, and it had earned its fatigue honestly. Vask monitored it the way she monitored everything, by its gauges, and its gauges held in the green. But our power telemetry went out to Boundary 9 in the continuous stream with all the rest, and somewhere on the far end of 25 light minutes, one of their volunteers, A man we learned afterward had spent 40 years maintaining water infrastructure in some city of theirs, had taken it upon himself to watch the pump's electrical draw the way other people read a pulse. In the hours after the blackout lifted, he found what he was looking for. A flutter in the current trace, cyclic, faint growing. The signature, he wrote, of a bearing beginning to fail under load, perhaps 30 hours from seizure, and the desk had run his finding past 3 more of their pump people before sending it, and all 3 concurred. Your main slurry pump is dying. The transmission said, Pharaoh's voice, flat as ever. Your gauges will not show it for another day, and by then the wear debris will be in the loop. We heard it in your power trace. Procedure follows for inspection, and we will be wrong about this happily if your hands find a healthy bearing. We do not believe we are wrong. They were not wrong. Vask pulled the inspection cover on a pump her gauges called healthy and found the bearing race scored and the first dust of failed metal in the lubricant 30 hours from seizure, give or take, exactly as a stranger's ear had heard it through an electrical wire from across the dark. She stood looking at the evidence in her palm and then keyed the channel from the engineering panel herself, the only time in 9 days she transmitted personally rather than through me, and sent, in their language, assembled from the phrase store, with an engineer's economy, 2 words, heard correctly. A seized pump in the final fold of the emergency would have ended us. There was no second main. The Ninth Furrow's designers had economized, as hauler designers do, on the assumption that no crew would ever need the slurry circuit for its life. The procedure that followed was therefore already waiting in the human queue, built in advance alongside the warning, and it was a cannibal's procedure. The secondary wash pump from hold 1, idle since that hold was vented on the 3rd day, stripped, carried aft, and cross-rigged into the main circuit with adapter flanges cut from patch plate. A wet, heavy, savage job, and it had to be done immediately while the dying main still ran, so that the circuit's interruption could be measured in minutes rather than hours. Wren committed 4 of the fittest remaining crew. In the heat of the 8th day, fit had become a word with very modest content. They worked in the pump gallery in rotating pairs, 10 minutes of labor and 10 of enforced rest with coolant packs at the neck, the medic's regime, refined by the human's physiology tables, and the work cost what work and that heat costs. Hold hand Selendrov on the 2nd rotation, missed a handhold she would never have missed in any cooler hour, opened her forearm to the bone on a flange edge, finished seating the adapter one-handed with the wound roughly wrapped, and reported the injury only when the seating torque was confirmed, an order of operations for which the medic reprimanded her and Brelon, who had trained her, visibly did not. The changeover itself took 11 minutes. Vask killed the dying main, and the circuit went still, and the thermal curve, which had been merely climbing, stood up like a struck animal. And for 11 minutes the only sounds in the 9th furrow were tools, breathing, and the tick of a hull spending heat it could not afford. When the cross-rigged secondary came up and took load, when coolant moved again and the curve sagged grudgingly back toward its survivable slope, the pump gallery crew did not cheer. They sat down where they stood in the order their bodies chose for them, and the medic moved among them with her packs, and aboard a station 25.5 light minutes away, 51 minutes later, a man who had spent his life with water heard that his ear had bought 37 lives another day, and sent back through the desk a single line that Okafor read onto the channel exactly as written. Tell the engineer with the cut arm that the seating torque was correct. Tell her also that there was no need to check it twice. The desk saw her do it. Respect from the waterworks. I logged it, and I logged what Selendrov said when I read it to her in the cool room, her arms sutured and splinted across her chest, which was, ask the waterworks how he saw me do it. And I logged the answer that came back 51 minutes later too, because it is, of all the transmissions of the 9 days, the one I quote most often to first-year signals students. The same way we heard the bearing. Everything a ship does is in its numbers, and everything a crew is in what the numbers do next. Yours checked twice, we noticed on the 2nd day. It was while the pump gallery was being made fast, in the same evening watch, that the other thing happened, the thing I did not learn the whole shape of until the courier came, but whose edge crossed our channel plainly enough that I logged it in real time with a query flag. A transmission arrived in the daily stream that was unlike every transmission before it. It was formal. It carried a header of a kind we had not seen, an institutional designation the library rendered as something like Office of First Contact, Survey Authority, and its content, addressed not to us but to Boundary Relay 9 itself, and copied to our channel with a deliberateness I only later understood was an instruction. Contact with an unidentified extrasolar polity, it said, fell under treaty-grade protocol. The channel was to be transferred to the appropriate board. Communication by unaccredited personnel was to be suspended pending review. I read it with a cold I had not felt since Whitlock's trajectory packet. We had 9 days dependence riding on a frequency that a distant authority had just, with perfect institutional reasonableness, ordered closed. I called Wren to the bay. He read it twice and said nothing, and we sat with it for the 51 minutes it had already been answered before we ever saw it, because the desk had copied us their reply in the same batch, time-stamped 8 minutes after the instructions' arrival on their end. The reply was Okafor's, over her own name and certificate number, and the library rendered it whole. Boundary Relay 9 acknowledges the instruction and will comply in full upon conclusion of the active distress incident. The instruction cannot be executed before then. The charter under which this station operates establishes one precedence above all others. An open distress working is not transferred, not suspended, and not restaffed while the caller remains in jeopardy for any reason on any authority. The caller remains in jeopardy. The ban belongs to the caller until the caller is safe. This is not the operator's discretion. It is the charter's oldest line, and the operator would point out, respectfully, that the authority issuing today's instruction is itself a signatory to it. Upon tug capture and confirmation of crew safety, this station will transfer everything, gladly, and its operators will answer for their conduct to any board that asks. Until that hour, the desk is staffed, and the working continues. Several of the protocol board's own engineers are already in our volunteer queue, incidentally. They have been very helpful. There was no further instruction from the Office of First Contact. There was, the records show, a great deal of activity behind it, committees convened in haste, a treaty-grade apparatus assembling itself around the fact of us with all the speed its gravity allowed. But the channel never flickered. The weather arrived on the hour. The endgame plan arrived 3 hours late, with the pump crisis as its stated cause and no mention at all of the other one, and I understood, reading between the procedure, that we had been shown the institutional transmission and its answer deliberately, as a kind of disclosure. They wanted the record, our record, to contain the fact that their own chain of command had reached for the channel in mid-rescue, and the fact of what their operators had done about it. Not boasting. Filing. A species that keeps its dead at a desk keeps its precedence there too. Wren had me append a single line to that evening's traffic and dictated it standing, with his hand flat on the console in the gesture I had stopped needing to interpret. Boundary 9, Master of the Ninth Furrow. Noted all of it. Be advised that this vessel's log now contains the following finding of fact, that between your people and ours, the first recorded instance of one party defying its own lawful authority occurred on the human side, in defense of C3 lives, on the 8th day. Whatever your boards and our tribunals make of the rest, they will have to begin from there. 51 minutes later, the answer came back, and it was not Okafor but the slow old voice, Whitlock, sounding for the first time in 9 days, entirely amused. Master of the Ninth Furrow, Boundary 9, your finding is received and will not be contested by this desk. One correction for your log's completeness. It was not defiance. Defiance is when you break the rule. We kept the rule. It is simply that we wrote that rule a long time ago for exactly this, and some of our newer officers forget it is the one on top. They remember afterward. They always remember afterward. Weather follows. Your star is quiet. Go look after your pump. The endgame plan arrived in the storm's wake, and it was the most human document of the 9 days, by which I mean it was ruthless about everything except people. The arithmetic stood as Vask had cast it. The last hold's cold rock would exhaust itself around the middle of the 8th day, and from that point to the patient hand's arrival stretched 14 hours, give or take the tug's final approach, during which the Ninth Furrow would have no cooling but her own dumb mass. The human plan attacked the gap from both ends. Before exhaustion, deepen the power down again, give up the bridge itself, consolidate all 37 of us into the cool room and the 2 compartments adjoining, let the rest of the ship go to oven so that one small heart of it stayed survivable. After exhaustion, a schedule of nothing, lie still. Move only on the hour, only as assigned. Their tables had computed the heat output of a working C3 against a resting one, and the difference, multiplied by 37 bodies in 14 hours, purchased the margin that the rock could not. Your last tool is stillness, Pharaoh's voice said. It is a real tool. Treat it like one. Every task in the final 14 hours has been examined by this desk, and all but 6 were found to be vanity. The 6 are listed. Nothing else to be done by anyone. The plan will feel like surrender. It is the opposite. You are spending your body's heat budget on staying alive instead of on feeling useful, and the desk expects discipline about it. We struck the bridge on the 8th morning. I carried the signals function down to a portable head rigged in the cool room's adjoining compartment. 1 screen, 1 key. The receiver gained full. And from that corner I kept the last log entries of the emergency, while around me the crew of the Ninth Furrow lay in ordered rows in the half-dark, on the monster's schedule, practicing the discipline of stillness while their ship cooked beyond the sealed hatch. The last hold exhausted at the 8th day's 14th hour, 20 minutes inside the human projection. Brelon vented it himself, the final 800 tons, the last of the voyage's cargo, and came back down the ladder slowly, an old man moving on a ration of motion, and took his assigned place on the deck beside the others, and said to the compartment in general, 40 years hauling rock. Never once unloaded a cargo where it was needed before. Then he closed his eyes and was obediently, dutifully still. The 14 hours of nothing are not well represented in my log, because the log discipline itself had been examined by the desk and paired to the 6 sanctioned tasks. The entries that exist are short. Heat at the hour, crew status at the hour, the receiver's traffic which never stopped, Boundary 9 pacing its transmissions now like a pulse, procedure when there was procedure and presence when there was not, Okafor and Tran and Saarinen in rotation, talking us across the gap an hour at a time. They asked us questions in those hours, deliberately, lightly, questions that cost nothing to answer and gave the mind a handhold. The names of our settlements and what the names meant. How Sethri reckon family. What the tithe belt looks like when the light catches it. What we would eat first when this was over. I answered for the ship, one key press at a time, lying on my side at the portable head, and the answers crossed 25.5 light minutes of dark and were received, we later learned, by a station where several 100 million of their kind were by then following the traffic, the whole patient catastrophe of us having spread along their networks until, in their home system, the phrase wrong number had acquired, in the space of 9 days, an entirely new weight of meaning. In the 11th hour of the 14, the heat in the cool room passed the line the medic had marked as the start of true danger for the weakest aboard. In the 12th, the old purser stopped responding to the hourly check, and the medic spent her sanctioned motion on him and got him back and assigned his next check to half interval. In the 13th, I logged the interior temperature drawing level with the worst projection center line and noted, in the margin, with a steadiness I did not feel, that the margin of the margin was now the whole of our inventory. And in the 14th hour, precisely where 9 days of stamped lattice estimates had always said it would be, deceleration flare lit the dark ahead of us, and the heavy tug patient hand of the Mercy lattice came down our track at last, vast and slab-sided and crude by our own kind, 9 days from the cry and exactly on time. Their hail arrived on lattice band prime, tone-stamped, correctly formatted. Ninth furrow, patient hand. Stand by for approach and capture. Confirm crew status. I confirmed 37 alive. There was a pause on the band, longer than transmission lag, and when the tug's signals officer came back, the format had slipped just slightly for the only time in the exchange. Ninth furrow, say again, count. 37 alive, I sent. All hands save the one lost in the originating event. You will want the supplementary log. It is large. They took us under capture within the hour, and their first survey team came aboard in hard suits through the heat, and I watched from the cool room hatch as the team leader stopped in the oven of the central corridor before the resin bedded, ram-cinched corset of mining plate clamped around our dead core, his lamp moving over it slowly, end to end twice. He asked Vask what shipyard had cut it. She told him the truth, that it had been cut on board, to templates received by transmission, from a species the Accord had not yet assessed, on a band the Accord did not monitor, and the team leader looked at the clamp for a while longer, and then said carefully, as if testing whether the words could bear load, received from where? There would be months of that question in every register the Sethri possess. But aboard the patient hand in the first hours, it had a sound I never heard again afterward, the sound of a rescue crew, good people, professionals 9 days hard burning at their queue's mercy, arriving braced for the silence of a dead hull and finding instead 37 souls, a clamp that should not exist, and a log whose supplementary volume opened with a voice saying, "We believe we are not your addressee." We kept the channel to Boundary 9 open through the capture, of course. I had stopped pretending we would close it merely because the emergency had. Their Guess-A-Watch had tracked the patient hand's deceleration flare from 25 light minutes out, and the stream's hourly weather had appended, without comment, tug-sided, on schedule, well before our own confirmation could have reached them. When the capture clamps locked and the tug's umbilicals took our cooling load at last, when the temperature in the cool room moved downward for the first time in 9 days, and the crew of the 9th furrow felt cold air, and several of them wept at it, I sent the transmission I had been composing for a day and discarding for a day, and in the end it was 4 sentences, because everything larger collapsed under its own weight. Boundary 9, 9th furrow. The patient hand has us. Cooling restored, 37 alive, and your gap arithmetic held with the width of a scribe line to spare. The log of this ship will show that between the third hour of the first day and this hour your channel never closed, ours never will. 51 minutes. Then Okafor, and behind her unmistakably, a crowded room again, and her voice with the particular evenness of someone holding a tone against great inward pressure. Ninth furrow, boundary 9. Confirmed, and the desk notes the time of tug capture in the station log. Speaking for the watch, this band has been kept open for a long time, and it has heard a great many things, and it has never once heard the thing it was kept open for end this well. Your crew did the living. We only kept talking. A pause, carrier open. Administrative item, your distress incident is concluded. The band's protocol requires this channel be formally released to its monitoring state. Protocol does not say it must be released immediately. Boundary 9 will continue transmitting weather, language material, and engineering correspondence on the daily schedule until released by your registry or until your hull is safe at anchorage, whichever is later. The desk has voted on this. The desk was unanimous. Boundary 9. The patient hand's master, who had come to stand in the hatchway of my improvised signals corner during the playback, listened to the library's rendering of all of it and was quiet, and then said the thing that I chose, when the time came, to place at the very front of my testimony to the tribunal, because no one ever said it better, in either language, in 9 days or in the months of inquiry after. Signals officer, he said, I have run rescue for the Lattice for 30 years. I have never been early. I have never once been talked to like that by my own grid. He looked at the portable head, the single screen, the dead spectrum hissing its patient hiss. We answered a form, they answered a call. Make sure your log knows the difference, because I promise you the tribunal will not. The patient hand took us under tow that night, 9 days of dark ahead of her own engines, back to Vale Anchorage, and the heat bled slowly out of the bones of the 9th furrow, and the crew slept real sleep, the first since the storm. I stood the last watch of the emergency myself, at my one screen, with my ship dead and saved around me, listening to the daily transmission come in from a station I had never seen, in a language I was beginning, against every regulation, to be able to hear without the library's help. Weather, Gessa, quiet. Then the language lesson. Then signed by Saarinen, the full rules of the card game, because the transmission noted a towed crew has time on its hands, and the desk recommends against spending all of it thinking. We did spend some of it thinking, though. All the way home, under tow, with our dead drive cold, and the wrong numbers voices arriving on schedule every day, every one of us spent some of it thinking, because home was Vale Anchorage, and at Vale Anchorage the Accord was waiting, and the Accord had questions, and the first of them had already arrived, stamped aboard the patient hand. A summons, naming shipmaster called Wren, engineer prime Sorrel Vask, and signals officer Ven Tessel, to appear before the registry tribunal in the matter of unsanctioned exchange with an unregistered polity, contraventions of Standing Instruction 11, and the unauthorized restart of a condemned drive core. The Lattice holds all who fall. The summons concluded in the standard closing. Brelon read it over my shoulder and snorted, and said the only funny thing anyone managed in 9 days. They should be careful with that sentence, he said. Someone else already holds the patent. The tribunal convened at Vale Anchorage 31 days after the storm, in a chamber whose climate control I noticed the way only a crew of the 9th furrow would ever notice climate control again. And it convened, in fairness, with every intention of being just. I record that plainly. The Accord is not a villain in this account, and I will not let it be made one. The Accord is a procedure, and procedures are how the C3 survived their own early centuries in the dark. The Q is not cruelty, the statute is not malice. The statute simply had no slot for what had happened to us, the same way my receiver protocols had no slot for the voice that came up out of the dead spectrum on the first day. The whole of the proceeding, in the end, was the sound of an old and decent system discovering it had been answered by something it had no form for. They tried the contraventions in order. Unsanctioned exchange with an unregistered polity, established by my own logs, freely surrendered, complete to the timestamp. Acceptance of technical direction from a non-accurate source, established. Unauthorized restart of a condemned core, established, with the clamp itself entered into evidence by means of the patient hand's survey imagery, which the tribunal's technical assessor examined for a long time, and about which he asked Vask precisely one question, whether the preload figures in the human procedure had been correct. Vask, bandages off by then, scars laid flat along both palms, said they had been correct to within the tolerance of her own instruments, and that she had checked because she checked everything, and that in 11 years as engineer prime she had been handed cleaner work by no shipyard in the Accord. The assessor made a note and asked nothing further. Then they played the logs, all of them. It took 2 days. I had wondered whether the rendering would survive the chamber, whether transmissions that had held a crew together in a cooking hull would sound, in cooled and upholstered air, like sentiment. They did not sound like sentiment. They sounded like what they were, which is to say procedure, the most disciplined traffic I have handled in my career. And the tribunal, being made of people whose lives were procedure, heard it. I watched the recorder, the man with a face like a sealed hatch, through the playback of the first day, through we believe we are not your addressee, through send everything, do not summarize, and his face did not move. It did not move through the burn count either, through the voice from 25 minutes in the past, counting 37 strangers down to the second that would decide them. It moved once, and only once, at the storm blackout transmission flag content free by the library. The desk is staffed, the desk stays staffed, and what it did was close, briefly, the way a hand closes and open again, and I concluded that humans were not the only species that keeps a desk where it keeps its dead. Wren testified last. He declined counsel's framing twice, and finally said what he had come to say in the manner of a man dictating for a log, which, knowing him, was exactly his intent. The charge sheet says I accepted direction from an unassessed source, he said. I did not. I assessed them. I assessed them for 9 days with 37 lives on the scale, which is a more honest assay than this registry has run on anyone. You wish to know what they are? This polity we have not gotten around to. I will give the registry my finding. They are a species that staffs a dead frequency forever, on the chance that someone with nothing else will fall onto it. They heard a call they knew was not theirs, told us so in their first transmission, and then behaved for 9 days as if that fact were the least interesting thing about us. They will not cross space for you in time, because no one can, and they will not pretend otherwise, because lying to the drowning wastes the drowning's time. What they will do is take your dying ship into their hands by arithmetic alone and refuse, with a patience I have not seen in 40 years of mastering vessels, to set it down. Enter that as the finding of the master of the 9th furrow. And then, if the Accord's forms require someone to answer for the 37 people I did not bury, I am the answer. The orders were mine. I would issue every one of them again. The tribunal entered its judgment 11 days later, and the judgment is public record. So I will summarize it the way Brelon summarized it in the corridor outside the chamber, which was censured into the honors list. The contraventions were affirmed because the statute is the statute and the facts were the facts. The penalty was suspended in its entirety in consideration of outcome, exigency, and the judgment said, in a sentence I am quoting exactly because tribunal prose does not often do this, the demonstrated character of the party with whom contact occurred, and appended to the judgment, in the dry attachment where consequential orders live, were the 3 lines that mattered, the lines for which, I have come to believe, the whole proceeding existed, that a formal registry file be opened for the polity-designated terran, that the registry's recognition tables be amended from unassessed to assessment in progress, contact channel extant, and that the question of the Accord's on emergency monitoring doctrine, specifically the absence of any continuously staffed open band, be referred to the full council with the tribunal's recommendation attached. I have read the recommendation. It is 1 sentence. The registry has now seen what such a band is worth, and the registry cannot unsee it. The 9th furrow never flew again. The survey found her frames heat-cycled past certification, and she went to the breakers at Vale Anchorage, with her dead core still wearing a corset of mining plate which the breaker's master, on his own authority, cut free in 1 piece and would not melt. It stands now in the entrance hall of the Signals Academy, where I eventually taught, mounted on a plinth with a plaque that the Academy lets the first-year students believe is the whole story. The plaque says, this object held an 11-second burn on a fractured sleeve. It was designed in 9 days across 25 light minutes by strangers from a cargo manifest. Listen carefully on every band, and the channel never closed. That is the part I am asked about most in the years since, and the part that is hardest to make the young ones understand, because they have grown up in an Accord where the Terran weather feed is just another navigation input, where the joint emergency band, the new one, the one both species staff now, is a line item in the budget, where wrong number is a phrase old haulers use with a particular smile. They did not live the silence before. They do not know what the dark sounded like when every channel in it was a form. 8 months after the storm, a courier drone, human-built, the first Terran hardware ever to make anchorage in Accord space, matched orbits with Vale Anchorage carrying a sealed cargo of exactly 3 things addressed to the surviving crew of the 9th furrow. The first was the complete engineering correspondence of the 9 days. Every packet, every revision, every voice transmission, indexed and translated into formal Sethri by their side so that, the cover note said, our registry would never have to depend on our library's renderings to know precisely what had been said to us and by whom and when. The second was a schematic. It was our own main transmitter's focusing coil, the cracked third winding redrawn and corrected, with a manufacturing note certifying the revision against the fault that had smeared our distress call across a dead band in the first place. Sarinen's name was on the drawing block. Beneath the certification in small print in Sethri, someone had added a line that the formal translation rendered as so that your next call reaches its addressee, and that the informal margin of the document, in a different hand, rendered as not that it helped you any less the first way. The third thing was small, and was addressed to me by name. It was a sounder, a little desk instrument of the kind their stations use, loaded with a single audio file. The file is 11 seconds long. It is the sound of the duty room of Boundary Relay 9 at the moment our burn telemetry arrived and the containment trace was seen to hold 11 seconds of a small room full of tired people coming up out of their chairs, and it is labeled, in Okafor's hand, in our language, with the words she had transmitted on the first day and that I had never until that moment heard in her own voice, because the library had rendered them in flat machine type while the woman herself spoke them into the dark towards strangers. She had decided sight unseen not to lose. We are listening. I am old now as my people measure it. I have keyed more transmissions than any signals officer in the registry's logs. The Academy checked once, for an anniversary. And I will tell you the sum of what I know about the species that answered us, the finding of my own 40 years to set beside Wren's. The grid we called was 9 days away, and came in 9 days. The strangers we never called were 25 light minutes away, and came in 51. Both of those are facts of physics, and neither is the finding. The finding is what each of them was doing before the call. The lattice was waiting for a form to arrive. The humans were listening for a voice to fall out of the dark, any voice, anyone's, on a band they had kept lit for centuries against exactly that hour, because they had buried crews once for the lack of it, and had decided, as a species, in the oldest decision they still enforce, never to bury anyone for that reason again, including, it turned out, 37 strangers who misdialed. At my retirement, the Academy asked me to choose the inscription for the Joint Band's new monitoring hall, where Sethri and Terran operators now sit the watch together over a frequency that is never, under any statute, permitted to go unstaffed. They expected, I think, something from the tribunal judgment, or from Wren's testimony, which has entered the anthologies. I chose the close of the very first transmission instead, the one that came up out of the dead spectrum 51 minutes after a cracked coil, sprayed our distress at nobody, the 8 words I have heard every day since in the hiss behind every band, and I had them set above the consoles unattributed, in both languages, because by now they belong to whoever sits the watch. If we do not understand your language, send anything, and we will work on it. We are listening.